Welcome everybody to this is the fourth in our open source live stream series. My name is Oliver Sumner. I manage the Contemporary Visual Arts Network in the Southeast. My colleague Kirsty Banks is in the background working the technical side. Thanks to Kirsty. We're just a little bit about us before I introduce our guests. CVAN Southeast is allied to CVAN, the Contemporary Visual Arts Network, which is the national network for England. You can find out about us at cvansoutheast.com, CVAN southeast.com, where you can sign up to our newsletter and find out about our social media channels. These events are recorded and will be available on our website. We've got more live streams coming up, and you'll be able to, in the next few weeks, and you'll be able to also look back at previous ones. I think this is the fourth in this series. We're calling this series open source, and it seeks to tap into the informal conversations that happen in our work and that we rely on to address some of the big challenges we are tackling as artists and art workers of all kinds. Open source is one strand of a wider programme called VisualiSE, and it's funded by Arts Council of England Southeast. We encourage you to give your questions and comments if you have them, but particularly questions either in the YouTube chat, and if you're not able to access that for some reason, we'll also be monitoring our Instagram messaging and comments, which is the Instagram handle is at CVAN_SE. So today we're taking a look at the visual arts sector from the perspective of neurodivergent art workers and their allies. It's a big topic and one that seems to have growing interest as more people get diagnosed and become more visible in the in society, but also not including in the visual arts sector. I'm going to encourage both speakers to talk to each other directly, and I'll be here to moderate the conversation and keep us to time. From a personal perspective, also just talking about the breadth of the topic, we're really talking from a personal perspective. That's really the approach of these talks. So we're not trying to give a kind of an institutional overview or anything like that in this case. It seems appropriate to add that my personal interest in this topic is as a neurodivergent person who's worked in the visual arts for about 30 years. So our contributors, Sonia Boue is a multiform artist. She is also a writer and a consultant for neurodiversity in the arts. Her performative and responsive visual arts practice is rooted in a fascination with family archives, material memory, and the themes of forced migration and inherited trauma. Her work has been exhibited internationally and is held in digital form at Tate Britain, the BBC, and Bodleian Library in Oxford. Sonia has performed in the UK, Ireland, and Spain. Sonia is a board member for AN, the Artists Information Company, and is also an artist member for CVAN Southeast. That's our own steering group. So welcome to Sonia. Joe Offer, and Sonia's based in Oxford. I didn't mention that. Joe Offer is based in Brighton and is an inclusive arts practitioner, collaborative designer, and educator. She has developed inclusive art strategies and resources that aim to support wider access and opportunities for all. And Joe shares these through teaching in colleges and universities, training and support for arts organisations, and one-to-one mentoring for artist facilitators, many of whom are neurodivergent. She is co-director of Rocket Artist Studios, and her recent project, Together Studios, explores creative problem solving beyond the neurotypical. Jo might refer to some of this in a bit more detail. So welcome to Jo, welcome to both of you. Just to remind you to unmute when I bring you in. That's good. Good if you probably unmute now. And just to start off, now we've done the introduction, just very briefly asking you just to talk about your relationship with this topic, your personal journey, perhaps a very brief introduction about the relationship between your work and neurodiversity, whether positives or the challenges. Can I bring you in first, Sonia, please?
Thanks. Thank you for the offer to come and talk and have this conversation today. I'm just going to do an audio description. So I'm a late discovered neurodivergent white woman with a mid-length curly mullet. I'm wearing translucent pink framed glasses, and I'm sitting at my desk in front of a bookcase full of things that I love. A brief explanation of my current energy levels using spoon theory, which if you don't know about, I recommend you Google Christine Miserando spoon theory. When my spoons are high, I love to speak spontaneously. I'm reading from a script right now because my spoons are a bit low, but it also means that I couldn't script my words for the rest of this talk. So we'll see what happens. I'm sure it'll be fine. So I'm proudly autistic. I'm certain I also have a kinetic neurology, which is a term that I very recently came across for ADHD. Though in my case, this is yet to be formalized. It's in the family. I'm also dyslexic, dyscalculic, and dyspraxic, and have several co-occurring health conditions, which I'm told are related to my neurology. I say this not to overshare, but because it's common for neurodivergent people to experience complex challenges. I don't think this is really fully understood, and I think it needs to be. So as for my own sort of process, it's a very late discovery of neurodivergence. And I put a lot of my learning down to immersing myself in online spaces and finding community and recognition. Yeah, one of my all-time favorite community resources, which I'd like to share, is the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. If you're not familiar with it, it's a website platform, but they're also very active on various social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And they're fantastic at showcasing diverse perspectives. And I particularly recommend it for allies, if there are allies listening in, because you'll learn a lot. And I still do learn a lot from Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. How I began sort of becoming the person I am today in terms of my professional life as well, because I do a lot of advocacy, and I run projects which are sort of my own practice-led neuro-inclusive research, which I like to share. But yeah, I really started blogging and advocating as a parent, and found myself embraced by a community online, found recognition gradually. And one of the issues that I found sort of held me back in understanding myself earlier were stereotypes. I didn't think that this could be me. And I really hope that that's changing, because I think it's a huge barrier to self-knowledge, are the assumptions that we have about what it is to be autistic, what it is to be neurodivergent. And also, you know, the stigma that has gone along with that. So I've been really excited to see what I think is a period of change during my sort of 25 years, really thinking about and observing the scene as a parent, and now as somebody who can kind of feel part of the community as a neurodivergent person. So it was in 20, sorry, do you want me to stop now, Oliver?
Finish that thought, and then I'll bring Joe and come back to you. Yeah.
Okay.
Go on, Sonia.
It's the final thought. So I just want to say that I started doing the work that I'm doing now in 2016, and I think of it as like an extended research project into navigating the arts as a freelance autistic neurodivergent artist. And my next shout out is to Arts Council England for their sustained support for my work and advocacy. It's been quite remarkable. And from the get-go, I treated my ACE applications as a forum for change in which I could talk about my challenges and my research findings. And in many ways, my applications represent a body of work, I think, and starting to think about it in this way, which I find exciting. And each project has proved a means to generate a knowledge base, which I also like to open source.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you. And very eloquent as always. Joe, so just to bring you in on just the question of your journey in relation to neurodiversity and visual arts by way of a brief introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm also a white woman with grey hair and pink glasses. I would consider myself, I think I'm an ally. I think that's what I've been described as, and it feels comfortable to me. I teach, mentor and support artists and organisations who work with general public and with diverse groups. I teach and research inclusive arts practice, and I have been doing so at the University of Brighton for the past 12 years. And I now offer support for people who work with people through another organisation that I'm running called Social Art Space. One of my specialisms is working alongside learning disabled and or neurodivergent people as co-director of the artist-led supported studios, Rocket Artist Studios, which you've already mentioned, Oliver. I was responsible there for setting up a sustainable business model that went beyond sort of funded projects, and that could also serve to employ and train support artists who worked there, as well as provide dedicated quality arts opportunities for people who may not be able to access mainstream arts education for whatever reason, but also missing out on the subsequent networks and career pathways. I'm a trained inclusive arts practitioner and researcher, which means I design projects that deliberately provide entry points for people so that they've got agency to develop the project from within it and then to collaborate if they wish. And also what comes from that is ownership of the outcomes, which is really exciting. It's really important for me to also have an active collaborative practice alongside my teaching, my research, because inclusive practice for me is a relational practice, and it doesn't matter how long that I've been doing it or what it's called, because I think language often changes. There's always more to learn, and working with other people, I learn about them, but I also learn a lot about myself. I think that's a real positive thing for me. And I also, we were asked to think about challenges. I think the biggest challenge of this practice for me is time. It takes time to really get to know someone in order to work meaningfully with them. And time is often one of the things, but it costs, time is money. And that's often something that's quite small or kind of restricted within projects. And I really worry about projects when the process is kind of shaved away, the process of working with people is shaved away to provide an outcome. That's always quite a difficult balance. Thank you. That's me.
Oliver, you're on mute.
I've got so many tabs open. I'm dealing with people's questions. I was just saying, thank you, Joe. We've got questions coming through in the chat, which I will come to. So if you've asked a question, just hold on. We'll get to those. I'm I'm conscious that some people are seeing our video and some people are not, so I'm trying to pass that on to Kirsty while we're speaking. Just opening out to some of the questions that we've discussed in advance of this, Joe and Sonia. And one of the things we were talking about was about more flexible and open career pathways and entry points into the sector. Just sort of how welcoming visual arts is for neurodivergent people, and whether that's improving, and some of the things that are raised by that. Is that something you'd be able to respond to, Sonia, from your experience? But I think also from one observation I think is really obvious is I think for you it's not a choice to be an artist. It's sort of fundamentally part of who you are. I don't think you'd be able to not be an artist, just from knowing you. So yeah, maybe that's a place to start. I guess you can't really untangle the kind of Sonia Boue that is an artist and neurodivergent Sonia Boue. It's all you. But so sort of that, with that as a starting point, for people that are neurodivergent and working in the visual arts, whether that's a choice or whether that's just part of your identity, how can we make it a more welcoming place?
Yeah, I think it's a really big question, but I think a lot of it, actually on a practical level, a lot of it boils down to what Joe was talking about, and I was very much relating to it, which is time, giving process and people time, and really not being so fixated on outcomes, and not having such a set idea of what those outcomes should be or look like. I mean, from my experience of it, I've had this circuitous route into being an artist. I love what you were saying about you couldn't imagine me not being an artist. And I think it was always meant to be. I wanted to be an artist from the age of 7. I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to be, but it felt very closed to me because I couldn't see myself in the kind of, this is going back to the 1970s, to the kind of art practice that, it sort of was, it still felt quite conventional, sort of the kind of art education that was around. I got very put off, actually, and ended up studying something allied in history of art, and then training as an art therapist. And it really, the barrier for me was that I wasn't interested in observational and representational work, and hadn't quite alighted on any kind of entry point that would allow me to be a conceptual artist from the get-go, or that would enable me to be a multiform artist in the way that I need to be from the get-go. It's something that I've had to develop and make a career that's me-shaped for myself in the arts. And I'm hoping that will have changed. In 2023, I'm hoping that things are very different at school, which is where, of course, all this art education begins. So yeah, I would say, once you're in the arts, you need more time and space and more flexibility, and people to realize that a lot of the practices that are sort of very embedded in the way that the arts are run are not compatible for everybody. They don't work for everyone, and that's unfair. But before you even get there, you kind of need this message, a strong message coming through that actually being an artist can be a very broad and diverse identity. It doesn't have to be, it's like any stereotype. It's unhelpful, and it boxes your thinking in. So Yeah, and I think, you know, if curriculums could take on, one of the conversations we've had, Oliver, is about, you know, the neurodivergent canon and reclaiming, you know, many artists who we feel probably were neurodivergent, who are very revered, you know, and thought to be great artists. And it's like, it would be really lovely if that could be something that was part of a curriculum that would encourage people to see, actually, yes, you know, I can envisage that being very obsessed about something can actually forge a career path for me. That would have been really helpful to know at certain points, that actually it's okay to be, you know, really focused on something that can be highly unusual, but can make you, you know, learn some skills and become good as an artist in your own way, that you don't have to take a conventional route.
Joe, you pick up. Really encourage you to respond to each other so that we can keep it flowing.
Yeah, I love the me, sorry, overlap. Yeah, I was really interested in what you're saying about the me-shaped space that you kind of was missing and that you had to create. And I think thinking about this question, I really strongly feel that we need to increase a kind of rethinking of the systems that I don't think are serving many people. They're certainly not serving anyone that doesn't quite fit into the education system. The arts education doesn't feel joined up. I think I personally believe that art creativity is a human right. It's a kind of thing that we have within us, and we've sort of lost it, or it's been kind of reframed as something only some people are allowed to do. So having permission, giving yourself permission, finding ways to give yourself permission is really important. But obviously that's a really difficult, that's a hard thing to do, isn't it? That takes a lot of courage, and it kind of needs support. And I think one of the sector issues that I think the sector could do is actually provide opportunity, and perhaps with neurodivergent people, redesign what it is. I mean, we're creative. We've got the opportunity and the capacity to rethink this. I don't think when you go beyond mainstream arts education, we don't have to stick to that kind of model of you're good at it, you're not good at it, you're assessed at it, we don't have to keep that, but it's sort of still there. I would really, I think taking out the competition side of things is quite important as well. So thinking about how, thinking about kind of what happens when we go into a world where we're working with people. So from my perspective, working on projects, funding and competition is something that really prevents networking and discussion. But I do really believe that working together and networking is vital. So I think one of my I haven't got the answer, but a proposition is we need to find a way to have networks where we can safely have our own spaces and our practices, but share. Because I think I've recently seen so many small organisations that work with maybe a few people, but for those people, that's a massive part of their life, disappear because they've lost funding. And I think that's happened forever. It's happening now, but it's sort of the way the arts just is undervalued. It is quite awful to see. But I think as artists, we do have. I am an optimist, and I do think with rethinking things and perhaps people who think differently to me, I know have got better answers than me when I've done projects with them. So I think if we can collectively put our heads together and find some ways forward, just some starting points. I don't think it's possible to have all the big goals. We just need to start.
Yeah, well, I'm all for that optimism, and getting started is really what it's about. One thing, maybe less for artists, although there might be situations for artists, but certainly for people that work in organisations or have to apply for things. A big thing for me is panels to do with recruitments. Going on, you go for an interview, and because so many interests need to be represented in the recruitment process, you end up with a panel of about 5 people. I find that really difficult in an interview process, and I know quite a lot of neurodivergent people do. We're all different. One neurodivergent person is one neurodivergent person, but I think it's quite common to struggle with panels, and very often appearing in front of a panel is really quite a small part of the role that you're applying for. It's not really a kind of a great analogue for testing being in the role, and also responding to a series of questions that you've not had in advance is maybe not that common an experience except in an interview process. And I'm not really sure what would be unfair about just telling everyone what the questions are in advance, so that they can reflect on their answers beforehand. So that's something that I would really welcome. Does that resonate with you, Sonia? Have you had bad panel experiences?
I did as a much younger person. I think I'm actually, one of the things that's happened to me since I actually managed to teach myself was something that happened in my studio spontaneously. I managed to teach myself with the use of my iPhone video. I worked out how to talk more fluently. So it's got a little bit easier, to the extent that if I'm on home turf, then I actually prefer talking spontaneously than having to spend hours preparing and trying to script myself. I find that really, really burdensome. And I think actually the answer is we need to do away with conversational interviews, because it's a neurotypical norm that you get to know somebody and you get to know what they're about and understand them through conversation. And that's not true for everyone. And I think it doesn't take into account the fact that many neurodivergent people, not all obviously, one can't generalize, but many of us are translating ourselves. So we're working, we're always working double or triple to actually get into a room, be in the room, and then we have to compete as though we're neurotypical. And I just think it's unfair. And I agree with you. If you're going to have a conversational interview, give the questions first and allow people to answer in the manner that suits them, so that they can show themselves at their best. But I would prefer the type of, it's like you're saying, it might not reflect the role. Okay, if you're going to be a panelist as a job, great. But what's wrong with having someone do a task or take part in something active? And I think in the arts, I've talked about this before in other spaces. What about a studio visit? What about coming to see me in my studio and having a chat with me there on home turf? Why is it always down to the individual to go the extra mile, when actually the individual might be the person who needs the most help in that room? So yeah, that's how I feel about it. I think it's unfair, and I think it really should be looked at. It's a good issue to bring up, Oliver.
Absolutely, yes. We seem to have lost Jo. I guess it's a Wi-Fi problem, and hopefully she'll be able to get back in shortly. So we'll carry on, and I hope she'll join us. Shall we turn to some of the questions that came through, Sonia? So going back to when you were talking about spoon theory right at the very beginning, which is something that I'm a little bit familiar with, although maybe not as much as you. But it's a kind of an accounting idea about your kind of energy and your attention, your capacity to engage with something. So if let's say that taking part in this will take quite a few spoons, and you'll have to pay those spoons back later on by going and sitting out there in a dark room, or whatever, going for a walk, or whatever, listening to some music with headphones on, something like that will just pay back the spoons that you used when you were engaged in this talk. The question is, someone asked, I don't know, there's no name, who is to decide what is the correct amount of sharing? You were talking about whether you were oversharing or not.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think only it's down to you. I mean, I generally choose my spaces carefully in talking in detail about my neurodivergence. And one example is my access rider is very non-specific, because I know that could go to lots of different places. But I felt for this talk, it was worth just going into some detail about the complexity of, you know, some of our profiles. We can have really overlapping profiles, and I think a very up and coming topic is the overlap between autism and ADHD. And so I was keen to just flag that, and I felt it was worth giving quite a bit of detail about all the different challenges. So I guess nobody can tell you what's an overshare. I kind of was being a little bit jokey when I said that, but I know it's kind of like it's like that. It's also it's very neurotypical thing, I think, but you know, when people ask you, how are you? And they don't really want to know. It's kind of like that thing. So I think I was being a bit defensive as well. I go, right, okay, well, I'm gonna tell you all of this about myself. And that's actually quite neurodivergent, because I do also like to info dump. So
yeah. I think you just say it, and then just say, oh, I'm probably oversharing, and that gets you out of any kind of awkward etiquette. Joe, I'm so pleased you managed to get back. I think you would just have Wi-Fi problems or something. Have you frozen? Are you there? Are you with us, Joe? I think you've frozen. I spoke too soon. So let us know if you come back, Joe. There's another question, Sonia, about what was the link you were talking about, so I can share it on. Oh, this is from Kirsty. Sorry, yes, and you've answered. So the links were the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, and the other one was Christine Misrandino Spoon Theory. That's right. So that's in our chat here. Question from Nellie. Hello, Nellie. I feel aggression to new ideas and of perceived naivety is a real issue. Do you feel this is the case now?
I think there is hostility. I think one of the problems that we have in the arts is this idea of what's cool and not cool. I don't think neurodivergence has been cool. It's becoming cool. You know, I've seen a massive. So I've seen like a massive, like in 2016 when I first came out as autistic in art spaces, I felt it was a very lonely place. And now it feels like a beautifully populated place where I've lost track of how many people are now sort of coming forward with their identities, and it's wonderful. And you know, you can see it being picked up. But I think the reality of it can be very different. So it can feel like we're riding on this wave, and there are pockets of, you know, really great activity and great projects and people doing wonderful stuff, I think particularly at grassroots level. But I do think that there remains this kind of like industry sector sort of cool that is very hard to penetrate. And I think authenticity and just sort of I don't know, maybe authenticity is the wrong word to use, but the kind of like the sort of embodied sort of can't help being an artist, need to produce stuff type practice is not really considered in the same way that somebody maybe who is very strategic and goes along a certain career path would be considered. I think that's fair to say.
Yes, that's maybe related to this idea we were discussing of the canon, or sort of what's considered sort of rigorous art practice, and it needs to be maybe not emotional and not kind of from a kind of a deep psychological drive, but from something that's more theoretical.
Yes, I think the psychological need to make and the sort of more embodied type of practice can be associated with what has been branded outsider art, which is a term I hate, but I think that's possibly the association, so that you have this idea of insiders and outsiders, which is abhorrent to me. But that seems that's how it feels. That's also how it feels a little bit in terms of my own experience.
Jo, I know you've been having difficulties.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep dropping out. Can you hear me? Am I back in?
Yeah, you're in. Did you?
I'm in. Yeah, I did, and I think that really, I'd love to talk about that a bit more. The kind of idea that it's sort of, I like making things neat and tidy up, aren't my thoughts, and what I've got is this thread that if we went back to arts education and allowed people to be the artists that they were without imposing, there's a lot of imposition of what an artist is, and a lot of ideas of what artists are, and it's quite old-fashioned, isn't it? It's kind of like the suffering artists on their own in painting. It's always painting. It's quite restrictive and for everybody. But I think if we can have more of that in our arts education really early on, and give people the confidence to be artists when they're doing art, full stop, and perhaps we would all benefit from actually just owning our own individualized way of working. One of the things that I would just was thinking about what an organization might do to support inclusion would be perhaps, and in terms of rewriting art history, perhaps rather than rewriting things, perhaps starting now with people who are supported to write their own public text, write their own labels. I don't mean write it, I mean in their own preferred communication. So, it doesn't have, getting away from text is also really important, I think, for myself. So moving away from the written word as a way of assessing you, whether you're studying or whether you're in an interview. I like what you were saying about panels, Oliver. Perhaps if we were asked beforehand, what's our preferred way of showing our experiences, knowledge and ideas, then we might have more variable. It doesn't have to be loads, but we could have a selection of different ways of doing it, like you might have on an assessment. Anyway, so I'm kind of losing my thread because I'm getting all excited about how everything's joining up. Yeah, that.
Yeah. Shall I pick up for a bit and then come back to you? Yeah. That's the different forms. Yeah, just talking about, you've got me thinking about panels again now. I'm just thinking of an example where an employer that a past employer that I think really helped a lot. Instead of having a panel interview, I was able to have a sofa chat with the director. That sounds terribly exclusive, but that I found that far more relaxed way of of getting across your passion for that organisation and what they stand for, and I think people are interviewed in that kind of way in lots of sectors. That's how you get interviewed if you work in hospitality or something like that. But when it's the arts, suddenly you're faced with 5 people with clipboards. Anyway, that's onto another thing. We've got quite a few questions, and Joe, I think we've got Sonia's fan club in, because all the questions are for Sonia. But one is, actually, could you respond to this one first, Joe? Do you have any links or tips for starting a neurodiverse artist collective? Would you, do you think of Rocket Artists as a collective? It's more of a studio, isn't it? I think Joe's frozen again. Sonia, on neurodiverse artist collectives.
So I'm assuming by neurodiverse we mean a mixed group, so neurodivergent and non-neurodivergent people.
It might mean
or we might, or it might mean, I don't know which to respond to, but should I because I think neurodiverse suggests that it would be more of a, I don't know what it suggests, but anyway, shall I talk about neurodivergent collectives? Yeah, okay. So obviously Nuke Collective are a good group to look at. They're wonderful. They're based in Scotland. It's NEUK Collective, and they've created a lot of resources for artists and organisations, and they've just partnered with I think an organisation called Open Door to expand and run some programs for artists that include mentoring. So that's a really interesting model to look at. I formed a collective in 2017, I think it was, called WebWorks. And that was a very loose collective of creatives, not just visual artists. We had writers as well as part of our collective. And we worked together on an Arts Council funded project, but it was difficult to sustain for all of us. And actually what's been great though, is it was a good springboard for people to then go off and do other things. So I think of a collective might be something that, because of executive function challenges and the difficulties of staying in touch, it could be something that you do for a period of time around a shared project, which can help all of you then sort of go off and do things independently. And the other collective that I've been involved with is Gravitation One-to-One, which formed in 2022 around an open call. And it involved myself and two other artists, and we basically work one-to-one. I don't think we ever had a group meeting. And we sort of supported each other to create an event for Autograph. And we sort of combine networks and ideas, and it's more of a kind of creative collective rather than, you know, collecting around an idea or a sort of a mission for social justice, which was more WebWorks. Gravitation One-to-One was really around creative practice, but also trying to talk about neurodivergent space and situational mutism, which is a profile that I'm particularly interested in talking about, because I think it's very underrepresented.
And just on collectives more broadly, whoever asked that question, if you do start a neurodivergent or neurodiverse artist collective, please get in touch and let us know about it. But also on collectives more broadly, there's no rules, are there, Sonia? You just have to find what works for you as a group of creative people, artists or creators or whatever you are. And I think the focus has to be around the work and that process of generating work, because I think that has to be the key thing. And if the fact that you're neurodivergent brings a particular process to that, then that's really exciting.
Definitely. And I think also, as well as it being about the work, part of the work, for me anyway, working collectively is about we're figuring out how to do it accessibly for all of you. And for me, it's worked best with quite intimate groups, so that it's not a lot of executive function challenge involved.
And as Joe said, I think the key thing is to get started, get in a room or online, find the place where you could just, and maybe also that kind of working that's very provisional, where we're just playing around and this isn't real yet, because that's often the most creative, isn't it? Yeah. We've got loads of questions and not much time. Do you mind if we move along, Sonia, and hopefully Joe will rejoin us. Sonia, would you share how you came to choose the title multiform artist for yourself?
I think this comes back to the kinetic brain, kinetic neurology idea. But I think I've come across this quite a lot in a lot of neurodivergent artists, is this need to sort of work across different forms. And I did begin with a painting practice, actually, through my art therapy training. I attended a group which taught me how to work in a process-led way, very intuitively, with materials and imagery. And I sort of developed that and thought that I was a painter. And then later on, when I sort of started to work more autobiographically and working with family history, which I did for a period between 2013 and 2019, I became very frustrated with the medium of paint and naturally wanted to sort of move into sort of other ways of exploring the, sort of storytelling and picking up narrative threads and making responses. And I had an opportunity to work with a filmmaker at one point, and I felt frustrated that he was making the film. It was a brilliant film, but I was frustrated that it became his film. It was about my work, but it became his film. And it was just that thing, well, I want to learn how to do this. And so, I kind of taught myself, and I've kind of done that with multiple forms. So I've taught myself photography, I've taught myself, I've worked with objects, assemblage, I'm currently working with collage. And it's this kind of, inner restlessness. And it's not necessarily the form itself that I would want to stick with for forever and ever and become a genius at it. It's not that's not what interests me. What interests me is how do I express this, and what can I use to get that across? And the actual learning at something new is my buzz. And the more challenging it is, the more I want to get my teeth stuck into it. And I think this is to do with having what my mum used to say, short attention span. It's this kind of a restless curiosity that has to be satisfied. So yeah,
we've got about 5 questions and 10 minutes, so we need to save it for the podcast, but we haven't got one, so we can't do that. I think the answer to this one is no. Joe or Sonia, any neurodivergent groups in the US and or Canada? I don't have any knowledge, but except that I watch loads of neurodivergent Instagram, and that's nearly all US and Canada.
I don't know of any offhand.
Not just neurodivergent. I was thinking creative growth. That's a supported studio. I don't know if that's there's San Francisco.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, creative growth. Yeah. Yeah, I'm aware of that. Great, done that one. Joe, what are your thoughts or advice on how to get neurodivergent art into art history?
I think start now with what you're doing, and gradually the world will. I don't know if I can. I don't know how I feel about re-looking at people and deciding from a perspective of not being them, making some sort of diagnosis. But I think it's definitely great to say, look at their work, look how they thought about the world, think about look at the way they approach things, and that being giving me permission to do it my way and to rethink that. I find I'm not in a position to put labels on things. I don't like doing that. I don't like having them put on me. So personally, I wouldn't look back. I would look forward and think about how to change art history from now onwards. But histories always need rewriting, don't they? And actually, one of the questions that I would have with anything is who's deciding what's going in and what's going out. I think the more artists that can make their own statements about themselves at the time and leaving some sort of legacy for other people to unpick. There's also something about the mystery of who you are that some people might not want. I don't know. There's different ways of seeing it. I don't feel I'm in a position as an ally to do that, but I can definitely appreciate different ways of seeing the world. I think one of the important things is to collaborate and have those discussions, though, and decide what you're going to talk about and why we're going to do it. One of the big things for me about any project is why we're doing it. So if a rethink of rewriting art history, looking at artists and thinking about where they might fit in to what we know about neurodivergence and neurodiversity, that would be an interesting project. But I think there might be quite a lot of different ways of looking at it, because there are loads of different ways of being an artist and being in the world, which might make it interesting, but I don't know if it will narrow it down.
Ready for another question? They're quite meaty ones. Sonia, wave if you want to come in, or just come in. How would you advise young people in managing their path to an artistic career, and how can young people join these neurodivergent collectives?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, go on, Joe.
If you can't find one, then you might have to make one. There isn't a template for any project, I think. One of the things that I was thinking about today was that there are lots of different ways of being inclusive. There are lots of different ways of being a group, but actually finding, having a conversation with someone else, maybe find one other person, or find a couple of people that might know of someone else that wants the same thing as you. Decide what you want. Colleges quite often have support. You know, if they haven't, if you've got a college near you and they haven't got anything, well, maybe go to the front desk and ask who's the best person to talk to. And if they haven't got anything in their structure, maybe you could set one up, but they should have. And I think it's finding ways to have these conversations with these organisations and bigger organisations, whether they're galleries or education institutions. Those organisations should be looking to support communities if they're not already supporting them. But I think one of the things I've found is that people don't know who's walking past and not coming in. And that's an important question for institutions and organisations to be asking. Who aren't we talking to? Because they're not coming in and talking to us. We don't know who they are.
Yeah. And including ask your local art gallery. And for some people that might feel like a kind of a big thing, but just ask them. That's what isn't that what they're there for?
Yeah, and local studios. If the gallery might know studios as well, which can be a bit hidden away because artists tend to work in corners. Yeah,
and ask us as well. Ask your CVAN network if you're in England, and if you're not in England, then we can probably find a comparable network. How would you? No, I've done that one. Do you have any tips for ADHD, ASD, autistic spectrum disorder artists collaborating one-on-one with a neurotypical high-functioning person? That's the language that they use. Tips for ADHD/ASD artists collaborating one-on-one with a neurotypical person. Go on.
I've got some principles of collaboration which I think anybody could use, and also they can be scaled up and used organisationally as well. The first one, there's 7 of them. I'll quickly go through them. So the first one is learn and unlearn from each other. Then the second one, step back from being an expert. Recognise what everyone brings to the collaboration. And work together and alongside each other. Be exploratory and open. Have, really importantly, this one, have a flexible structure and framework. So have something that can move about depending on what you're doing and doesn't restrict you. And then the final one is take time and don't rush each other or yourself. So there's obviously, there's more to them, there's more inside each one of those, but they're really good principles that we use in inclusive practice that are quite good to have. You can have them on the wall, you can have them between you. They're kind of the contract between you. They're a good starting point.
Well, you were the right person to ask that question too. That's great. I think we're going to do all the questions. Sonia, as well, as we round off, we'll just have this question and then we'll wrap up. If there were 3 or more things local authorities and funders could do to improve access and opportunities for neurodivergent artists, what would you prioritise or advise? That sounds quite big. Let's just say 1 or 2 things that just from funders and local authorities to improve access and opportunities for neurodivergent artists. We kind of started with that kind of thing. Does something come to mind for you, Sonia?
Yeah, it does. I just want to speak very briefly to the points that were made about art history. I'm kind of in the opposite camp. I think we should reclaim people, and I think it's a cultural issue. I don't think it's a medical issue. I think any problem with reclaiming people as neurodivergent is around kind of ickiness to do with stigmas, and I just don't really have any time for that. So I just thought I'd put that there because it feeds into the next question, which is, well, how are young people going to find a career path in art if they don't have role models to look up to? So I think those 2 things fit neatly together. And then in terms of what funders and local authorities can do, the main issue I would pick out is communication, and bureaucracy. And there's a classic example, which is around trying to get access support from Arts Council England to be able to, fill in a funding application. So you've already got a process to go through in order to get the support that you need for a very onerous process. And it's very good that that support is there. But it's just so, I'm talking from very recent experience that somebody who I know has been trying to get this access support using what they didn't know was the old system, which is email us, tell us what you need, and we'll ask you a few questions and then we'll put it through. Now there's an online form, and this has caused a delay, and that person didn't know, and I don't know where it's been advertised that this change has happened. And you can't speak to people on the phone. You have to sort of somehow telepathically know that this change has happened. And I think it's the way that funders and also local authorities tie people up in communication tangles and bureaucratic knots, and that should just be done away with. And I'm going to give you an example. So on my current, oh, sorry, do we have to go?
Well, 30 seconds, go on.
Okay. These things can all be done so quickly with emojis, and that's going to sound a bit wacky, but that's what I did on my project. I got people to sign their artist agreements with just a thumbs up emoji, and I checked with a solicitor that it was legal, and they said as long as you both know, as long as there's a paper trail and you both know that that's what you've agreed to, that's legal. So
Right. Thumbs up all round. Thank you both very much. Just for the audience joining, we'll try, people are asking for resources and for Joe's principles. We'll get as much as we can onto our website. Bear with us, it might take us a little while, but keep checking back, we'll try and get it up there. We've got our neurodivergent peer group. It's happening next week on the 12th, Wednesday the 12th of July. If you're interested in that, you can find it on our website. Sonia Boue and Joe Offer, very, very grateful for both of you. Apologies for any technical glitches, but I think we got there, and really great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.